That's the person. I got Attorney Extraordinary Benton Watson here. He's got a whole bunch of notes. We've been talking about this debate, and this is a hot topic, and I totally understand why. You get emotional. When you get emotional, things can be said. So, Ross, welcome to the show as always. It's good to have you on here.
Welcome.
I'll tell you what do we got going here? You and I talk all the time, and tell us where we're at.
Yeah. So I think you just, like I said, we've been on here before. We said we don't really, probably to our demise sometimes, but we don't really prepare for our discussions. I think we like to keep it kind of open and honest. And
well, we're both sharp
flowing.
on our each particular topic.
So we just kind of say a topic and then kind of go with it. And some days it's interesting. And yeah, and I think your topic was today you wanted to get into some of the constitutional principles. It was you sent me an article actually that the individual was arguing that the Second Amendment was an individual right instead of being a governmental constitutional provision in and of itself, or something that was given to us, so to speak, by the Constitution. And really, that's nothing new. And so to really give an explanation, let me just quote the Second Amendment. It's a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So a well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed.
In your notes, do you have the preamble to the Bill of Rights?
Yes, let's not get into that because we're going to run short of time.
Okay,
anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't
matter, but I want it anyway. Joel, would you look up find out for me the preamble of the Bill of Rights? I'll talk about it later.
Okay, so really, if you want to know everything about the Second Amendment, you can get great information from the District of Columbia versus Heller, a United States Supreme Court case written by Justice Anton Scalia, and in 2008. That was where the District of Columbia tried to ban certain weapons, handguns especially, saying they had to be disassembled. You could get a petition from the local law enforcement officer, but even then it had to be disassembled or locked in the home, basically useless, even if you had a petition to use it. And several people appealed. It was really a scholar who set up the appeal. There was a couple of lawyers involved as the plaintiffs, but there was also a police officer, two police officers, a couple of government officials were ones. They wanted to take their gun to the house after they got off of work. They wanted it for home defense. A couple wanted recreational use. They said the District of Columbia was not a state. Right? And so regardless of the militia clause, right, it wasn't a state, and that so it didn't apply. They said and it wasn't an individual right, and so nothing in the 14th Amendment made it apply to the District of Columbia, and it could do what it want basically in disregard of the Constitution because it was not individual to every person. So before I get into that actual opinion, though, I want to say this is a lot of what we have in our Bill of Rights. So we have the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment we've talked about, and the Second Amendment, and even to the fact of no quartering of soldiers, right, in the Third, and even in the Ninth and 10th, giving all of the rights to the people, and taking the Fifth Amendment due process into consideration, all the criminal rights. All of these things are a hodgepodge that work together, and each one is essential for the other. For instance, without a First Amendment right, how do you have lawyers? Without the due process right, how is your lawyer going to argue for you? Without a First Amendment right, how are you going to have a press to expose corruption? Without the First Amendment right, how are you going to petition courts when the courts themselves have no oversight? Right? Without the Fourth Amendment, if they could seize and search every single paper in your house and take every paper without, based on general warrants like they used to do, then the free speech would be useless. Right. Each one interacts with the other in such a way that it makes one big bulwark, what the courts have said in the past, a bulwark of protection to stonewall, right, overzealous government officials. And different sorts of government officials, from the military to prosecutors, to judges, to sheriffs, to police chiefs, even downright to administrative officials, tax officials. Everybody in the government prevents overzealous action. And so each one of these is essential. And then when you look at it, when you go back to especially how these started, how America started, how the Bill of Rights was made. It was a big push in the 1700s and 1600s that there were rights that were ordained by God. There were rights that were ordained by God, because if the courts were not subject, if they were subject to themselves, there would be no oversight. And so there was this big push that the courts were subject to God, because there were rights that were personal, inherent, right, and personal freedom, which was God's right to judge and no one else's right. Does this make sense?
Makes sense to me, brother.
Okay, so if the courts have no oversight, then any rights that were given by courts could be taken away. But rights that were given by God, or that were natural, that pre-existed the existence of the courts themselves, right, could not be taken away by the courts. Does this make sense?
Total.
The courts could not take away something that existed before the courts existed, right? By natural, inherent, God's process. Okay, and so there's a lot more to this. And so if you have questions about what I'm saying, you can get in touch with me, or I'll email you some information on it. But that's basically the big push, and it was to deter general warrants and general conduct. So you had then the development of the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists that created the Constitution. You had famous people like Patrick Henry, who was a lawyer's lawyer, trial lawyer, okay, and saw all the injustices, made famous poor, had several unsuccessful businesses, went as a lawyer and just skyrocketed in representing people who were unrepresented, people who were common people. And he ends up being one of the strongest advocates and best trial lawyers. Have you ever heard of "Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death"? That was Patrick Henry. He had made another famous speech. Caesar had his Brutus, Charles I had his Cromwell, George III. Everybody yells, "Treason, treason, treason!" And he looks at him and says, "If this be treason, make the most of it." Okay, and so, and this
I'm
goes
impressed, Ross.
This
I'm
goes
impressed.
back. Yeah, this goes back to 1765. That was Patrick Henry in the House of Burgesses in Virginia, right? And the Second Virginia Convention. This is some of the most inherent, right? And I talk about these because this goes into context of the founding. This goes into context of why we needed these rights and why these rights were so sacred. And it was because there was overzealous. I mean, I wish I could had time to talk to you about the general warrants and the the Stamp Acts and the Tax Acts and the things that happened, and how there would be government officials just storm into your building or your office or your home, right, because they didn't like what you were saying, or because they didn't like your business, or because they didn't like your affiliation or status. These things happened, and every one of the founding fathers were also hypocrites in their own way. They each did something, but there was this general understanding that, in general, maybe there's an exception to every rule, but we have these rights that cannot be ignored by government. And so then you have these Federalists and this is why we had the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Some famous ones are Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, John Adams, one of my favorite, almost all-time favorite jurists, Chief Justice John Marshall. Okay, and these guys actually argued that we should not make a Bill of Rights because these rights are already inherent. If we make a Bill of Rights, people are going to assume that they were given to us by the government. This was several arguments by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, John Adams. Why would you want to make it appear as though we don't already have these rights? These rights already exist. We already have free speech. We can already carry guns. Guns was essential to everyday life there.
Could the argument be that if somebody who may not be as educated, at least they got a place of reference they can go to see it?
This and Patrick Henry and people that were in the courts knew the government would eventually, slow process of just taking control and taking your rights daily, day by day by day by day. And I can tell you, thank God we had the Bill of Rights, because, look, the Fourth Amendment is already useless today. I'm telling you, the Fourth Amendment is basically useless, right, as we sit today. And it used to be we could shoot people. We could shoot a police officer who was trespassing on our property. Okay, to some degree, you may have a self-defense claim, but you're almost not going to have a Fourth Amendment issue, right, in that sort of context. We do not have the same kinds of constitutional rights today that we did. And so all of their premonitions, all the things that they predicted would happen by the government, which slowly eats away and chews away at individual liberties, right, has proven to be true. Were it not for these Bill of Rights, there's no telling where we would be today, because sometimes the Bill of Rights has been the only thing to save us right? From over promulgation, a proliferation of regulatory control.
That's why I wanted to read the preamble. I'm not going to do it now, but I'm going to read it because in it says basically we want no confusion, we want no misunderstandings, and we'll read it later, Joel. But keep going.
And so I want you to know, we already had these things as an individual, right? And that is a good segue into Heller, because that's exactly what Justice Scalia said. He said that we have these individual rights when we look at it, when you look at the plain text, because shall not be infringed, right? Shall not be infringed, okay, says that the right already exists. Okay, shall not be infringed, you start there, that's what the whole article was about. If it shall not be infringed, this thing didn't actually give a right. It basically said that it shall not be infringed. Okay, and the plain text of the language, which Scalia actually brings up, but there was an operative clause and there was a prefatory clause, and the prefatory clause is a well-regulated militia being necessary to secure a free state. Okay, that's the prefatory clause. And so a lot of people say, well, the only thing that says is we're allowed to have guns for a militia. Right? And the operative clause is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Justice Scalia points out that throughout history and throughout the writings of the general era, the operative clause is what we take into effect. And sometimes prefatory clauses, like the preamble to the Constitution, were meant to be controlling, and other times they weren't. And so, that's why people understood that prefatory clauses weren't controlling. Right, they were put in there maybe as a descriptive usage, but there was no evidence that this was meant to be absolutely restrictive. And without absolute evidence of that, it was understood that any kind of prefatory clause was simply there as a descriptive way, but it did not encompass everything that the individual provision discussed. Okay, and so basically, it says the right of the people, and so. The dissent in Heller tried to say that the people is citizens. It's not. If it was meant to be individual, they would have used. If it was meant to be individual, they would have used citizens as opposed to the people. The people meant some class, and that the people was often used as part of the militia, and so that had to be the militia. And Justice Scalia goes into context and other texts and writings, and just really kills the dissent. In this position, because the people in most contexts meant the polity, the community of people, the people in general, the people who were citizens of the state, right? And citizens was never used on the federal level; that was only used at the state. And in fact, citizens in these terms was used with the right to bear arms, and so it only looked like the people meant to keep the people of the United States. Okay, give them these rights. And I don't want to get too academic here, but I think it's important that people know all of this stuff. And I think that when you look at it and somebody tries to say, well, that thing talks about a militia. These guns, it bothers me, these young kids, I know they mean well, get on there and say, we don't need a militia. We couldn't take the government over anyway, or we're not going to be able to protect ourselves, or this and that. And to the lady who called, Matt and I disagree all the time, for one, but... we do
It'd be
appreciate.
a pretty boring show if we agreed all the time.
Right, exactly. But we disagree pretty often, I think, and not necessarily about the fundamental issues, but definitely about some side issues. We have a lot of fun jargon back and forth because of our disagreements. But
the bottom line is, I think we always want the same result. It's just
right.
the method of getting there.
If the people had broken into the lady's house with AR-15s or AK-47s, and all she had was a pistol, right? This puts her as a disadvantage. Can I have a little more time? Just a little bit.
We got lots of time.
Okay, he's playing the music here.
You playing music?
No, it was time immediate. It's off now.
Okay, we're good.
Okay, and so as far as if they tried to come in with these assault weapons and she had no way to defend herself only with the use of a pistol, that's putting her in a very bad situation.
Well,
and the same was true.
I would differ if you're trained on how to use it, but I understand your point.
But not everybody is you, man.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at me shooting and you look at you shooting on Friday nights, there's no comparison.
It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with I understand operational procedures of weapons, and you got a semi with a semi. One's a rifle, one's a pistol. It's all tactics. Okay, that's all it is. So if you're so worried about it, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the general masses. just get
But
some training.
It's possible you have more rounds though.
I have a pistol that can hold 30 rounds.
Again, he's referring to himself as the general population. I love.
You know how many people out there got 30-round mags?
You're not the. I don't think that you guys are the general people. I don't. I mean,
right,
anyway,
all right, go on,
this is what I'm saying. We disagree.
Here's
We agree to disagree. Okay, so look, so just assuming though she had these not trained as well as you are, this maybe puts her at a disadvantage. Okay, at least looks a lot scarier. Okay, and more intimidating. And so that's in fact what was happening in the day. These weapons were used for self-defense. They were used for hunting. They were used to defend crops, and they were used to make sure that the government. It was a classic scheme. It was very common for the government to get rid of militias by getting rid of guns. The king would often not get rid of the militia. He wouldn't ban militias. He would ban the ownership of guns. This is how he would make the militias useless.
Wouldn't that be kind of the same thing as like saying keep your guns, but we're not going to let you have ammunition?
Right. Keep your yeah, exactly. They completely banned ammunition, and so it must be, since the militia is made up of the common people, right, who already had guns, and in context, they carried guns every day.
That's right.
Okay, I mean it was already known at the time, like very well known. You had a right to carry a weapon, and so during that time, if that's the context, and the militia was made of a common man, and the people were allowed to carry already, then it was already known that you could not ban guns, right? Because that's how you ban a militia, is to ban people's right to carry a gun. So the right to carry a gun had already existed, point blank, period. And I want to get to the last part because I know we're running short on time, but I want to make this point. I think it's big. I think it's big. Scalia goes into post-Civil War legislation and post-Civil War commentary and commentators that wrote in that time, because there was a big push. There was a big push right after Civil War to take away weapons, one, and to especially take away weapons of the black freedmen, right? The slaves that were freed. Because, see, they still wanted to keep control over these people. This wasn't necessarily the government, right? These were other private citizens not wanting freed slaves to have weapons because they did not want the free slaves to have any power.
It's the same thing that's happening today, only in corporations. Corporations and the big money want to sway the way politics goes.
Well, you need to talk to Rick Dodd about that. But no, that's right. I agree. But hey, so this was government as well as private citizens trying to take away, right, the right to bear arms of black men, and they were saying, and black men and women, by saying that they had no right to bear arms. This was making the very similar arguments that we hear made today, and we hear time and time again. We see legislation, right, that's made that's allowing black freedmen the right to carry. I think I underlined one of them here. So there was the Congress enacted the Freedmen's Bureau Act on July 6th of 1866, and it says it was to protect black freedmen in some context, and it says the right to have full and equal benefit of all laws, proceedings concerning personal liberty, personal security, the acquisition, enjoyment, and disposition of estate, real and personal, including the constitutional right to bear arms. If it was only about a militia. There's no way that Congress would have made this enactment. There's no way that would have passed the rest of these laws if it only dealt with militia. It was viewed as an inherently individual personal right of self-defense to defend your castle, your homestead, your crops, your property, your right to free speech, your right to due process, your right to counsel, your right to challenge, right, governmental control, governmental overzealous proliferation of regulatory control that was overzealous, right, and in violation of your liberties. Today, we have to be careful, or we be charged for murder for shooting police when they come and trespass on our place. But that's what I was saying. We have no rights today, and I feel like that's why there is more citizen on police violence, is because the Constitution has become basically useless, and so police are more free to invade people's personal space. And I believe that people have gotten more irritated, right, by having to justify themselves in every single thing they do. We've talked about the millions of criminal laws out there, both state, and then we talked about how it doubles or maybe even quadruples when you talk about the state effect plus the regulatory control. We're not even talking about administrative provisions from the state. And so when people feel like they're under this pressure and that they have really no freedom, this is when people start to push back. And I feel like, and
Let me ask you something then. Why do I get so much heat? Because and I'm not saying from you, I'm saying in general. Why do I get so much heat when I want to get to the core element of what that Constitution and Bill of Rights is? Because we're deviating from it so far. It's becoming diluted, watered down, and useless. I want to go back to its purest form. Because from that purest form, we can start once again to do it the way it was meant to be, and that's to be able to protect yourself and all the other rights that you had just mentioned. But that center core line, they're strangling the goose, and they're killing the goose that lays the egg. So why do I get so much heat? Because what you're saying is, you say you agree with me.
I agree that that the Second Amendment protects individual rights. Now Heller did not
Protects all the other rights too.
It didn't. There was another push to say that the Constitution at that time talked about muskets. There were muskets. We don't have this. Well, if that's true, then your free speech would be useless because there were no computers, right? There was no Facebook. There was no social media, right? And so that means we don't have any free speech. We don't have any free speech because those are new methods of communication that weren't back at the time. No, yes, to some degree, I'm an originalist. I'm at least a textualist, right, to the Constitution. There's no hiding that fact. I don't shy away from that, right? I'm not one of these people that thinks the living Constitution, but you cannot read it that narrowly, right? No one can read it that narrowly. It applies to the acts of government, to the types of method and manners of government, not to the individual technology of the day. That's why under the Fourth Amendment, police can use technology, right? To they can in Kilo or Kylo, I heard it pronounced both ways, right? They can use, right, some sensors but not others, right? There were no sensors in the constant colonial times, right? So some they can use, some they can't. When it invades the privacy of the home, right, then it's invasive and it's violative of individual liberty.
In your opinion, Ross, what do you think is truly the detriment to this country and its Constitution and Bill of Rights? What do you think is the detriment?
Lack of education, breakdown of the family unit, right? Over regulation to some degree, and then not enough regulation.
Inaction by the citizenry too, of being, like you said, knowledgeable, learning. But I got to blame some of this. I blame. It gets down to the individual. Each individual has the responsibility to be learned on subjects. However, there's a lot of manipulation out there by media, people with sordid gain. They want sordid gain and do malicious things to get those sordid gains. And people are weak-minded and happen to fall into a line with those types of people. But I agree. It's a lack of learning, pride, love of country, a whole bunch of factors.
And it's not
a mental issue going on.
And like I said, there's different viewpoints. There are those that view the Constitution as a living document, should update with the times and the fashions of society. Right, I believe that is dangerous. But I have many great friends, and I have well-respected professors that have this view, and I mean, they're very good people, and they're very good lawyers, and they've been very good lawyers, and they're a lot smarter than me. But there's a lot of other smart people that are smarter than me on the other side as well, in the same camp as I am.
I'm okay with things like that as long as the core thread stays solid. The goose is well and alive and well. And then if you want to paint the golden eggs that come out, color them different colors, rainbow colors, whatever colors you want, I'm okay with that. And if it doesn't work, we try something different. But my fear and what I actually see is that the core element, the goose, is being plucked. Feathers plucked, strangled, the whole works.
And so it's hard to say, too, about... it's hard for people to know what the real truth is when you have so much politics and so much money being thrown around, and for lobbyists and throwing all kinds of statistics, none are consistent. They're I mean, how do you even know what's true? And then you see this tragedy, and its kids die. And I can tell you, as a trial lawyer, I've had cases where my guys pled, I think they're innocent, but a kid got hurt, and so we pled guilty because the facts look bad, and so it looks bad. And I think people have gotten emotional and have not looked at history and context and the real statistics, but not all of that is their fault because it's got so blurred. Everything has gotten so blurred, right, from the two camps, and it's just it's hard for common people.
We're going to run just about a minute late here. You know how I do an analogy like this. I remember driver ed course. As you're coming up to a traffic light, there's 3 different zones. There's the comfortable stop, there's the aggressive stop, and then there's the overshot because you didn't time it right to the red light. Okay. I feel as though this country is at a massive hard break to make the stop sign. And that is why you're getting people like me getting aggressive in opinion pieces and all that, because I see we're coming up to that stop sign. We are out of the green zone. We are deep in the yellow, about to hit the red zone and crossing the stop sign line where you're going to get that ticket. I do not want to go there. I'm putting on the brakes hard with 2 feet. The wheels are burning rubber on the pavement because I came to a screeching halt. That's what I believe this country's at, and that's what I'm trying to do. Because when we get past that point, we go over the precipice, man, you can't get it back.
It's a slippery slope.
Slippery slope. Tell everybody who you are, what you got. Rick, we thank you very much for the sponsorship of the segment.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Rick had some comments, some texts for me, ideas. I appreciate it always. I'm at 105 East Main here in Cameron. Like we said, down by the cattle pen. So adding on down here, come see me. I got the big milk cow on the side. You can't miss it. Also, I have an office in Houston, College Station, by appointment. So holler at me at 254-605-4140, 254-605-4140, or you can email me at benton@watson.legal. Otherwise, if you have a shot with Matt this weekend, or maybe at next couple weekends, make sure you toast to high treason. Yeah.
All right, look, everybody, we thank everybody for listening to the segment, man. We appreciate the call in. Anybody else want to give us a call? 254-697-6633. Joel, let's take a break.